And what we mean by prevailing factor is it's defined below. The prevailing factor means the primary factor in relation to any other factor. Now, all of this may sound like a bit of legal, language and things that you can nod your head and say, yeah, that sounds all right, but it may not mean anything more to you than any other words would mean under the situation. But let's go ahead and flip again. What I want for you to understand is kind of where we're coming from, okay? Because what you need to know is currently under the Kansas Act, aggravations, accelerations, and exacerbations, right here, or rendering pre-existing conditions symptomatic, if right now, under the Kansas Act, if you go in and you are litigating a case in Kansas, and if you can prove that you just aggravated, just accelerated, or just exacerbated a pre-existing condition, you will be awarded benefits. I don't know how many of you are aware as to how easy, how ridiculously easy. I mean, truthfully, I'm not saying this because I'm biased, even though I am. Even if you're not biased, and I think you try to look at these things through a normal lens. It's just ridiculous. We'll have employees that will be, walking right here and just step like that, with bone-on-bone knees, and come in and report and say, I was walking and I felt a twinge in my knee, and I was headed over to Joe's station to pick up, a copy I had just made, and that tweaked my knee, and now, I've got this injury to my knee. And you go and start going through the testimony and say, well, were you having any problems before? No, I was doing just fine. Well, 6 months ago, you were in and you saw your doctor, and he said you're bone on bone, and he said you need a total knee replacement. So yeah, but it really hasn't bothered me for 6 months. I've been, I know I had a problem then, but it got better. I was back doing okay until I just walked over to his station and my knee started hurting again. In those cases right now, your clients, your insurers, are paying for total knee replacements. They're paying for the medical treatment that goes with it. They're paying for the lost time benefits that go with it. They're paying for the permanent disability benefits. In other words, the disability that they have from the total knee, which run 37 to 75% of the leg, for just walking like this, those are costing you 6 figures. That's the current law. And I appeared on one this morning, and I had a guy who had 6 prior knee surgeries. 6 prior knee surgeries. But all he had to do, he'd had a left knee that he had injured, and it wasn't much. He said, well, I favored the left knee, so I walked more on the right knee. And the court says, well, you did aggravate, and you did render yourself symptomatic. Even though, when we took the doctor's deposition, he had arthritis in the knee before, he had 6 prior operations before, he was grossly overweight, all the factors that, were the reason that he needed a total knee replacement. But because of that, 1% aggravation, the employer has been buying all of these claims. These are cases that your insurers are paying on. What this Act does is, that's why this language, when I tell you about the prevailing factor and the primary factor, now the standard will be that the accident has to be the prevailing factor for the injury and for the disability. So if that individual needs a total knee replacement when he's walking and he steps on that knee, if he's had the prior operations, if he has the pre-existing arthritis, if he has all of these elements, those will be the primary factor. Those are clearly, and we'll have to put on evidence like you would in any case. But it's pretty clear that those are going to be the primary factor resulting in the injury. So instead of your client paying for that operation, that will be the employee's responsibility, whether through his health insurance or whatever other means that he would pay for it for. But it certainly was not an accident or an injury that was caused by his employment. You've been paying, but employers have been paying for these. I mean, this is the way it is, and this is the way it is right now. So everybody needs to understand. I mean, I think both Janine and John, who handle a lot of claims, can tell you they've paid more claims than they want to talk about in situations like that. John?
Just one quick. I had the judge actually cite the doctor's testimony that 1/10 of 1% of that injury aggravated it, and because of 1/10 of 1%, I bought a total knee, which is roughly $50,000 for the first one. And then, of course, you got to reserve it for the second one about 12 years down the road.
Okay.
So there's $100,000 of reserving to file for 1/10 of 1%.
Where you just happened to employ the person. Your employer just happened to employ. I mean, that's all it was. You just happened to employ somebody who had this condition. Well, we think work comp ought to be for work injuries. I mean, I think that was sort of the basis that we went forward with this. Is, you know, if you get workers' compensation, really is to compensate injuries that occur on the job. So it's going to be a big deal. I mean, you know, I know when they were pricing this, they didn't know quite how it would affect it. I think it'll have a big impact on your medical costs. And I think that's the biggest driver in this system anyways, the medical costs. In the cases that you can keep out of a system like this, where you're not buying them, that's going to save your clients a lot of money. And I think it's important for you to be able to explain to your insurers that, you know, because they'll be asking you, you know, when somebody has this type of claim, this now becomes, it will be a different situation when this act passes than it is now. Yes?
Is anybody going to explain this to the administrative law judges?
Yeah, well, I'll take you down the street with me and maybe you can help me.
You know, the problem is we've had some pre-existing, we've had some of those things, and the ALJ just decided that the law didn't apply. Yeah, but the problem is, you know, and I appreciate what you're saying, because I got to appear in front of all these people, so I got to kind of be careful in terms of what we've got some that we appear in front of that are pretty good, okay, and we got some that a few that aren't as good. But there were loopholes in the last act, because what happened was when they put in the language that talked about, you know, that you don't get compensation for the natural aging process. That was what they put in '93. The problem is they didn't take out the language that said that you get compensation for aggravation, acceleration, or exacerbation of pre-existing conditions. Well, we kind of approach this like with a sledgehammer. So the language in the act that we drafted says that just because you have an aggravation, acceleration, or exacerbation of a pre-existing condition doesn't mean you get it. It has to be the prevailing factor. Now, if you have an aggravation, if somebody comes out here and lifts a 60-pound boulder and they never had any symptoms and they blow out a disc that was bulging, you know, the prevailing factor may be that aggravation of the pre-existing disc situation. But if they just bend down and pick up this piece of paper and blow out their disc, and that disc was this far, you know, into the nerve, and that shows up on the MRI, we've got a pretty good chance to come in and say, okay, the prevailing factor is the pre-existing herniated disc that was going to go any time, anywhere. Now, I don't know that Administrative Law Judge A down the street is going to exactly come out that way at your hearing. I mean, but I think at least you have a chance to win with him now. Where you know, I can't write his awards for him. I'd like to, but I can't. but you know, I mean, we all know that's. Well, all right, I'll say this. When we were doing this, we said we're going to write this act with this guy in mind, and we're going to figure we're trying every case to him or to her in Wichita, as it may be. We're going to write this is that we're in front of them in every one of these situations. Because we want it written in such a way, you know, that they're doing it like exactly like you say. It's going to be hard as hell for them to get around, you know, what we've written. So we wrote it pretty tight. So we're doing everything we can to, you know, A-proof the law, whatever. So at any rate, so what you have now, these are important changes. Neutral risks, which have been compensable. You've got a case, the McCready case versus Payless, where the lady was walking and just fell down and there was no explanation. It's a neutral risk case. If you're just walking, there's no explanation for why you're hurt or why you fall or anything of that nature. Those aren't going to be compensable anymore. If you have an idiopathic type of injury, if somebody is injured because they have a seizure and they pass out and they are injured, those are not going to be compensable, at least the way we've written. So what we've done, I mean, we've taken the process to mean if you're hurt at work, you're hurt at work. And that's when you get, if your injury is work-related, you get compensation. Let's go to the next one. I think these are things that, permanent impairment of function, we continue using the 4th edition of the guides, separate section of the Act. Authorized treating physician, we've defined that. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. Okay. What I'd like to get into here, I think that we've reduced choices. Some of these are legal processes that aren't going to be as interesting to you as they might be to somebody like myself or those of us who are in this all today. But one thing that I think is important for all of you, and I think John raised this earlier in his comment, is right now in a Kansas workers' compensation case, you cannot close future medical unless the claimant will agree to close it. So anytime you go before an administrative law judge, unless you can get a willing compromise, that medical is open for life. Now, here's your problem as I see it, and your client's problem is how do you reserve for that? I mean, how do you reserve for lifetime medical? You get somebody who's, 30 years old and they've got an on-the-job accident and you can't get it closed, and even if it's something, a back strain, how do you reserve for it? What do? You got to carry this for 50 years? And it creates some real problems. Well,